The moment my niece's text message flashed across my phone screen with those words, "Maybe try to dress less poorly for the wedding than you usually do, Aunt Vivian," I felt a cold wave of humiliation wash over me. I stared at those pixels, each one a tiny dagger, as my cup of morning tea grew cold in my trembling hands. After 35 years as one of New York's most sought-after costume designers, hidden behind the scenes while dressing the stars of Broadway, I was being instructed on how to dress by a 26-year-old who thought fast fashion was the height of sophistication. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat frozen in my sunlit apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my life's work, framed playbills from productions I'd costumed, vintage fabric swatches in organized portfolios, sketchbooks filled with designs that had graced stages across the country. At 68, I'd dressed. Tony Award winners and Hollywood legends who specifically requested my work. Yet here was Sophia, my brother Charles's daughter, concerned I might embarrass the family with my appearance at her wedding. What Sophia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had dressed countless fictional brides in my career. I had researched wedding traditions across centuries and cultures, had sourced the finest fabrics from around the world, had fitted actresses whose names were household words while they breathlessly told me, "Vivian, this is the most beautiful dress I've ever worn, even if it's just for a role." I knew more about wedding attire than the entire bridal party combined, yet I was being told to dress less poorly. The irony might have been amusing if it hadn't stung so sharply. I placed my phone face down on the kitchen table, unable to look at those words any longer. Through my apartment windows, the Manhattan skyline cut a jagged path against the morning sky, reminding me of the distance between the world I'd inhabited for decades and the suburban New Jersey life my brother had chosen. A distance that had somehow transformed me in their eyes, from the family's artistic success story to the eccentric aunt who needed fashion advice. It hadn't always been this way. I remembered when Sophia was small, maybe 7 or 8, how she'd visit my studio wide-eyed with wonder. "Aunt Vivi," she'd ask, running her fingers over sumptuous fabrics, "will you make my wedding dress someday?" I'd laugh and promise her the most beautiful gown any bride had ever worn. Now, 15 years later, she hadn't even mentioned my profession when planning her wedding. As far as I knew, she'd bought something off the rack from one of those bridal chain stores, a thought that made my designer's heart wince. I picked up my phone again and reread the message, wondering if perhaps I was overreacting. But no, the words were clear, the intention unmistakable. This wasn't a casual suggestion. It was a preemptive strike against potential embarrassment. I scrolled back through our recent conversations, trying to pinpoint when exactly I'd been relegated to the category of family liability. Our exchanges had been increasingly sparse over recent years. Birthday wishes, holiday formalities, the occasional update about her engagement to Bradley, a financial analyst whose family apparently had connections in Westchester County. Nothing in our digital correspondence gave me any clue about why she thought I dressed poorly or what exactly constituted poorly in her estimation. My brother Charles called that evening, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness he'd developed since moving to the suburbs and marrying Elaine, who came from old money and had very specific ideas about family image. "Vivian, how's my favorite sister?" he boomed through the speaker. As I was his only sister, the superlative had always struck me as unnecessary inflation. "I'm well, Charles," I replied evenly, waiting to see if he would mention Sophia's message. "Good, good. Looking forward to the wedding?" "Just a month away now." He chuckled. "Sophia's been driving everyone crazy with the details. You know how these young women get about their big day." I took a deep breath. "Actually, Charles, I wanted to ask about something. Sophia sent me a rather strange message this morning, suggesting I need to dress better for the wedding." The pause that followed was brief but telling. "Ah, he finally said, the forced cheerfulness notching up several degrees. Well, you know how it is, Viv. These society weddings have certain expectations. Elaine's family friends will be there. The Crawfords, the Richardsons. I think a state senator might even make an appearance. And you think I don't know how to dress for such illustrious company? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. It's not that exactly, Charles backpedaled. It's just that your style is a bit artistic. Sophia is concerned it might not fit with the overall aesthetic they're going for. My style is artistic, I repeated flatly. Charles, I've designed costumes for presidents' wives in historical productions. I've dressed people for fictional state dinners and royal coronations. I think I can manage a suburban New Jersey wedding. Another telling pause. Of course you can, Viv. It's just, well, remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago? The caftan with the peacock feathers? I did remember. It was a vintage Zandra Rhodes piece from the 70s, worth more than Charles's monthly mortgage payment and infinitely more interesting than the beige landscape of his living room. I'd worn it precisely because Thanksgiving at Charles and Elaine's house was so mind-numbingly dull that I needed something vibrant just to stay awake through Elaine's extended family's conversations about property taxes and golf handicaps. That was a designer original, I said calmly, worth more than Sophia's first car. Yes, well, Charles continued awkwardly, it was a bit dramatic for a family dinner. Elaine's mother kept asking if you were in costume for a play. I bit back the retort that Elaine's mother, with her power-set helmet of blonde hair that hadn't changed style since the Reagan administration, was hardly a barometer of fashion-forward thinking. Instead, I simply said, I see. It's not personal, Viv, Charles added hastily. Sophia loves you. We all do. She just wants everything to be perfect for her wedding photos. You understand? But I didn't understand. Not really. As I hung up the phone a few minutes later, a complex tangle of emotions knotted in my chest. Hurt, certainly. Anger, definitely. But beneath those immediate reactions bubbled something else. A slow-building indignation that they could so completely dismiss who I actually was, what I actually knew, what I had accomplished in my field. Later that evening, I found myself standing in front of my closet, sliding hangers across the rack as I surveyed my collection. Vintage Halston, a scarlet Valentino I'd found at an estate sale for a fraction of its worth, hand-beaded evening jackets from the 80s, a collection of Japanese avant-garde pieces from my time working with visiting theater companies. These weren't just clothes. They were artifacts from a life spent understanding the power of fabric and form, the language of appearance, the art of visual storytelling through attire. What would constitute dressing better in Sophia's estimation? Some mass-produced polyester blend from a department store? A forgettable pastel suit that would blend seamlessly into the background of her wedding photos? The thought made me physically recoil. I moved from my closet to my workroom, where a dress form stood draped in muslin for my latest theater project. Around it lay the tools of my trade: sketch pads, fabric swatches, measuring tapes, specialized scissors. I ran my fingers across a bolt of Dupioni silk I'd been saving for something special. The shimmering fabric caught the light, shifting from deep sapphire to midnight blue as I moved it. A radical thought began to take shape in my mind. If they thought I dressed poorly, despite my lifetime of expertise, what would happen if I showed up in something undeniably exquisite? Something that would make it abundantly clear that I hadn't been dressing poorly all these years, but rather had been consciously choosing not to deploy the full arsenal of my professional capabilities in their presence? I picked up a pencil and began to sketch, almost without conscious decision. A silhouette emerged on the page, elegant, timeless, with just enough dramatic elements to make it unmistakably couture. Not a costume, but a gown that would speak the language of high fashion so fluently that even Elaine's state senator friend would recognize its pedigree. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone chimed with another text. Sophia again. By the way, Aunt Vivian, the color scheme is blush and ivory. Try to stay within that palette. I placed the phone back down without responding and continued sketching. Now with deliberate strokes. The gown taking shape on my page was definitely not blush. It was not ivory. It was the deep, shifting blue of the Dupioni silk, the color of twilight over the Atlantic. The next morning, I woke with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years. I spent the day making calls to industry contacts, pulling in favors from people who owed me for last-minute miracles I'd performed over decades of theater emergencies. By evening, I had sourced the additional materials I would need. Hand-beaded trim from a specialty shop in the garment district that was holding it for me. Vintage crystal buttons from an antique dealer who remembered the time I'd rebuilt an entire collection of 1920s costumes after a pipe burst in a theater basement. As I worked late into the night, transforming the Dupioni silk from flat potential into three-dimensional reality, I thought about Sophia as a child, about Charles before suburban ambition had smoothed his edges away, about the gradual estrangement that had happened so slowly I hardly noticed until it was complete. Each stitch became a kind of meditation on family, on worth, on the strange ways we signal belonging and exclusion. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sophia called. This was unusual. Our communication had been almost exclusively via text for years. Aunt Vivian, she began without preamble. Mom wanted me to check what you're planning to wear. She's concerned. Is she? I replied mildly, pins between my lips as I adjusted the hemline of what was becoming the most ambitious non-professional project I'd undertaken in years. Yes. She mentioned you seemed a bit defensive about my suggestion to dress more appropriately. Sophia's voice had taken on the slightly patronizing tone I'd heard Elaine use with service people. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. This wedding is really important to Bradley's family connections. I removed the pins from my mouth. Sophia, did you know I designed the wedding gown for the Broadway revival of Company last year? The one that was featured in Vogue? A pause. No, she said, sounding genuinely surprised. I knew you did costumes and stuff, but I didn't know you were in Vogue. Not me. The dress. Though the article did mention me by name. I made a small adjustment to the beadwork I was laying out. I've designed wedding scenes for 37 different productions over my career. I've created gowns for some of the most photographed fictional weddings in theater. Oh, Sophia said. I could almost hear her recalibrating. Well, that's really impressive, Aunt Vivian. I didn't realize. No, I agreed. You didn't. Another pause, longer this time. So, are you planning to wear something appropriate? For the wedding? I looked at the half-completed gown on my dress form, at the intricate beadwork that would trace constellations across the bodice, at the precisely structured silhouette that would put most wedding dresses to shame without ever competing with the bride. I promise you, Sophia, I said carefully, I will be appropriately dressed for the occasion. She seemed satisfied with this and moved on to other wedding details. The florist who was giving her anxiety, the bridesmaids who couldn't agree on shoes, the seating arrangements that her future mother-in-law kept trying to adjust. I made appropriate noises of sympathy, all while continuing to work on the gown that was becoming, with each passing day, a statement of reclamation. As the wedding approached, I received a formal itinerary from Elaine, not Sophia, noticeably, with my role carefully delineated. Family will be seated 15 minutes before the ceremony. Please arrive no less than 30 minutes early for family photos. Reception seating chart enclosed. I noted with a raised eyebrow that I had been placed at table 11, far from the main family. Table, sandwiched between Charles's ancient Aunt Gertrude, who was mostly deaf, and a couple I'd never heard of with the last name Wasserman, was being handled, managed like a potential disruption rather than welcomed as family. The realization should have hurt, but instead, it only strengthened my resolve. The gown was nearly complete now, requiring only final adjustments that needed to be made while wearing it. I slipped it on one evening a week before the wedding, the silk cool against my skin as it settled into place. Standing before my full-length mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked exactly like myself, the self I knew professionally but rarely presented to family. The gown was a masterpiece of understated drama. The deep blue silk caught the light as I moved, revealing subtle variations in the color. The structured bodice was embellished, with beadwork that appeared simple from a distance, but revealed intricate detail up close. The silhouette was timeless, emphasizing my still good posture and the height that had served me well throughout my life. This was not a costume. It was not a design for someone else, for a character, for a performance. It was, perhaps for the first time in my professional life, something I had created purely for myself, a sartorial declaration of identity. I was Vivian Crawford, master costume designer, artist, professional. And I was about to remind my family of exactly who I was. The day before the wedding, I received one final text from Sophia. "Just checking you got the itinerary? Remember family photos at 2 p.m. sharp. Blush or ivory, please." I didn't respond. Some revelations were best delivered in person. On the morning of the wedding, I woke early, a familiar pre-opening night feeling of anticipation humming through me. I took my time with preparations, a leisurely breakfast, a careful beauty routine, refined over decades of working with stage makeup artists who had taught me their secrets. By noon, I was nearly ready, the gown laid carefully across my bed while I put the finishing touches on my hair and makeup. As I slipped into the gown, zipping it with the practiced ease of someone who had dressed countless actresses backstage, during quick changes, I felt a sense of calm certainty settle over me. This wasn't about upstaging a bride or making a scene. It was about refusing to be diminished, about bringing my whole self to an event where I had been expected to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less me. The car I'd arranged arrived precisely on schedule. As we drove from Manhattan to the upscale New Jersey venue, a restored historic estate with manicured gardens that had been featured in wedding magazines, I watched the city recede behind me. With each mile, I strengthened my resolve. Whatever reaction awaited me, I would meet it with the grace and professionalism that had defined my career. We arrived at exactly the requested time, 30 minutes before the ceremony, 15 minutes before family was to be seated. As I stepped from the car, the late September sun caught the beadwork on my gown, sending prismatic fragments of light dancing across the stone path. A wedding coordinator with a clipboard hurried toward me, then stopped abruptly, her professional smile faltering. "I'm Vivian Crawford," I said simply. "The bride's aunt. I believe I'm expected for family photos." The coordinator collected herself quickly. "Of course, Ms. Crawford. The family is gathering in the garden pavilion. Let me show you the way." As we walked through the venue's immaculate grounds, I noticed other guests arriving, women in forgettable cocktail dresses and men in standard dark suits. Their eyes followed me, conversations pausing mid-sentence as I passed. Not because I was inappropriately dressed, but because I was unmistakably the best-dressed person who would grace this wedding, second only to the bride herself. And even that remained to be seen. We reached the garden pavilion, where photographers were setting up lights and reflectors for the family portraits. Charles spotted me first, his expression shifting from welcome to confusion to something approaching alarm in the span of seconds. Beside him, Elaine actually gasped, her hand flying to her triple strand of respectable pearls. "Vivian," Charles managed, crossing to me quickly as if to contain a situation. "What are you— that is, you look—" "Hello, Charles," I said, kissing his cheek calmly. "Lovely venue. The gardens are exquisite." "Your dress," he said, lowering his voice, although we were still perfectly audible to everyone nearby. "It's not blush or ivory." "No," I agreed pleasantly. "It's not." Before he could respond further, there was a commotion near the pavilion entrance. Sophia had arrived, still in her robe, hair and makeup complete but not yet dressed for the ceremony. She was issuing rapid-fire instructions to her bridesmaids when she caught sight of me. Her words died mid-sentence. For a long moment, the garden pavilion was silent except for the soft click of the photographer's camera adjusting settings. Sophia stared at me, and I returned her gaze steadily, neither challenging nor apologetic. Simply present, simply myself. "Aunt Vivian?" she finally said, her voice uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. Did you make that?" I smiled, my first genuine smile of the day. "I did. Just for your wedding." She approached slowly, her bridesmaids and mother, forgotten as she circled me, taking in the gown from all angles with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. When she completed her circuit, coming to face me again, I was startled to see tears in her eyes. "It's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen," she whispered. Then, more loudly, with a hint of indignation, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say you could do this? You could have—" She stopped abruptly, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air between us. I could have made her wedding dress. I could have brought my professional expertise to the most important garment of the entire event. I could have been included as more than just a potentially embarrassing relative to be managed and tucked away at table 11. In that moment, looking at Sophia's face, caught between admiration and the dawning realization of what she had dismissed, I understood that this wasn't the end of a story. It was perhaps the beginning of one. If you've enjoyed our story so far, please hit that subscribe button now. Every subscription helps our channel grow, and I promise you won't want to miss what's coming next. "Sophia, darling, we need to finish getting you into your dress." Elaine's voice cut through the moment, sharp with barely disguised panic. She appeared at her daughter's side, studiously avoiding looking directly at me. "The photographer needs to start the bridal portraits in 15 minutes. Sophia seemed to shake herself from a trance. "Right, yes." She turned to go, then paused, looking back at me. Will you come help me? With the dress?" A collective intake of breath from the assembled bridal party. Elaine's face went rigid with alarm. This was clearly a deviation from the carefully orchestrated wedding day schedule. "I'm sure the bridesmaids have it handled," Elaine interjected quickly. "Vivian wouldn't want to intrude on their special moment with you." "Actually," I said calmly, "I would be honored to help." I met Sophia's gaze directly, offering a small, genuine smile. Without waiting for further objections, Sophia took my hand and led me away from the garden pavilion, past her mother's protests and her bridesmaids' confused expressions. We walked, in silence through the venue's back corridors until we reached the bridal suite, a lavishly appointed room with mirrors, flowers, and Sophia's wedding gown suspended from a decorative hook, waiting. Once the door closed behind us, Sophia turned. To me? "I didn't know," she said simply, "about what you really do, about your work. Dad always just said you worked in theater like it was some kind of hobby. Your father has always been skilled at diminishing what he doesn't understand," I replied, moving toward her wedding dress to examine it. The gown was exactly as I'd expected, an off-the-rack design from a high-end chain, beautifully made but utterly conventional. A safe choice. "Do you hate it?" Sophia asked anxiously, watching me inspect the dress. I turned to her with a gentle smile. "It's a lovely dress and you'll be a beautiful bride. It's not what I would have designed for you, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel in it." Sophia bit her lip. "What would you have designed for me?" An hour ago, the question might have stung like salt in a wound. Now it felt like the first fragile bridge across a chasm I hadn't realized had grown so wide. Something that honored your bone structure, I said thoughtfully. You have your grandmother's shoulders. Elegant, strong. This dress hides them. I would have celebrated them. Sophia looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror, seeming to see herself through new eyes. I never knew that about my shoulders, she said, quietly. No one's ever said that before. I moved behind her, my own reflection joining hers in the mirror, the deep blue of my gown a dramatic contrast to her white robe. There's a lot we've never said to each other, it seems. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history. Her, childhood visits to my studio, the growing distance as she entered her teens and became more her mother's daughter than her own person, the years of gradually more infrequent communication, all leading to a text message about dressing less poorly and this unexpected confrontation with truth. We should get you into your dress, I finally said, breaking the silence. Your mother was right about one thing. The photographer is waiting. Together we worked to manage the layers of satin and tulle, the intricate row of covered buttons down the back, the careful arrangement of the train. My fingers moved with professional efficiency, but my mind was cataloging the ways the dress could have better served its wearer. A slight adjustment to the neckline, a more flattering cut at the waist, subtle details that would have elevated it from pretty to transcendent. As I fastened the last button, Sophia turned to face me. Will you tell me about the dress you're wearing? Did you really make it yourself? I did, I nodded. From the initial sketch to the final stitch. How long did it take? 3 weeks, I smiled. Though in fairness, I've had 35 years of practice. Sophia shook her head in wonder. And the beading? Those patterns, they look like stars. They are? I confirmed. Constellations, actually. The major stars are represented by Austrian crystals, the minor ones by glass beads and silver thread. Why constellations? She asked, touching the beadwork with gentle fingertips. I hadn't planned to explain this part, the personal symbolism I'd woven into the gown. But in this unexpected moment of connection, the truth slipped out naturally. It's Cassiopeia, I said. The constellation that was visible the night you were born. I was in the hospital waiting room while your mother was in delivery. It was a clear October night, and I stepped outside for some air. When the nurse came to tell me you'd arrived, I was looking up at those very stars. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I never knew that. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I said gently. Perhaps it's time to change that. A knock at the door interrupted us. Sophia! Everyone's waiting, called one of the bridesmaids. Sophia quickly wiped her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. Just a minute. She turned to me, suddenly looking very young despite the elaborate hairstyle and professional makeup. Aunt Vivian, would you sit with us at the family table for the reception? Not at table 11 with the Wassermans? I blinked in surprise. You know where I was assigned to sit? She had the grace to look embarrassed. Mom did the seating chart. I should have checked it more carefully. I would be honored to sit at the family table, I said, touched by this small but significant gesture of inclusion. I'll tell the coordinator to change it, she promised, then impulsively hugged me, careful not to wrinkle either of our dresses. Thank you for helping me, and I'm sorry about that text. It was horrible. Water under the bridge, I assured her, though in truth, the hurt hadn't entirely faded. But this moment of reconnection was too precious to tarnish with lingering resentment. As I took my seat for the ceremony shortly thereafter, I was acutely aware of the glances and whispers my appearance was generating. The deep blue gown stood, out among the sea of pastels and neutrals like a peacock among pigeons. Charles, seated beside me as Elaine fulfilled her mother-of-the-bride duties, leaned over with a tight smile. You certainly made an impression, he muttered. Elaine is beside herself. She thinks you're trying to upstage Sophia. Sophia doesn't share that concern, I replied calmly. In fact, she's asked me to join you at the family table for the reception instead of my original assignment with Aunt Gertrude and the mysterious Wassermans. Charles looked genuinely startled. She did? She did, I confirmed. We had quite an illuminating conversation while I helped her with her dress. You helped her with her dress. His confusion was almost comical. Elaine didn't mention... Elaine wasn't consulted, I said simply. It was Sophia's decision. Before Charles could respond, the string quartet began playing the processional, and the ceremony commenced. It was, as most weddings are, a blend of the personal and the conventional, vows that spoke of love and commitment, rituals that connected this union to countless others throughout human history. I found myself unexpectedly moved, not just by the ceremony itself, but by the sudden feeling of being properly present for it, rather than tucked away as an afterthought. The reception that followed was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a space that balanced historic charm with modern elegance. True to her word, Sophia had instructed the coordinator to relocate me to the family table, much to Elaine's poorly concealed dismay. I found myself seated between Charles and Sophia's new husband, Bradley's grandfather, an unexpectedly charming retired English professor who recognized my name immediately. Vivian Crawford, he said as we took our seats. The costume designer? Didn't you do the wardrobe for the revival of The Cherry Orchard at the Public Theater in '97? I looked at him in surprise. I did. You saw it? Saw it? My dear woman, I taught Chekhov for 40 years. I brought my entire graduate seminar to that production. Your interpretation of period Russian attire with those subtle modern elements was revolutionary. From across the table, I could see Charles listening to this exchange with an expression of bewildered reassessment. Beside him, Elaine was engaged in conversation with Bradley's mother, though her eyes kept darting to me as if expecting me to commit some social transgression at any moment. As dinner progressed, I found myself the center of unexpected attention. Word had somehow spread through the reception about my profession and the fact that I had made my gown myself. The mother of one of the bridesmaids, a Broadway enthusiast, recognized my name from playbills and came to introduce herself. One of Bradley's aunts, upon learning what I did, immediately launched into questions about the historical accuracy of costumes in her favorite period dramas. By the time the main course was served, I had fielded 3 inquiries about private commissions and 1 offer to design costumes for a community theater production of Mame. Charles watched this unfolding with growing astonishment, while Elaine's face cycled through a series of increasingly strained smiles. I had no idea you were so well known in theater circles, Charles said during a lull in the conversation, his tone suggesting he was reassessing several decades of assumptions about his sister. There's a lot you don't know about me, Charles, I replied without rancor. Perhaps because you never asked. He had the decency to look chagrined. I suppose that's fair. After you left for New York all those years ago, it seemed like you were living in a different world. I was, I agreed. But that doesn't mean we couldn't have shared more of our worlds with each other. The wedding photographer appeared at our table, requesting family photos. As we arranged ourselves according to her instructions, I found myself positioned prominently beside Sophia, rather than relegated to the edges of the frame as I had expected. Make sure we get good shots of my aunt's dress, Sophia instructed the photographer. She made it herself. She's one of Broadway's top costume designers. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, catching me completely off guard. This was not the dismissive niece who had texted me about dressing less poorly. This was a young woman seeing her aunt, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time in years. The photographer's interest immediately piqued. You designed this yourself? The beadwork is extraordinary. Thank you, I said, unaccustomed to being on this side of the camera, to to having my work on my own body be the focus of professional attention. "Would you mind if I got some detail shots after the family portraits?" she asked. "I've never seen anything like it." Before I could answer, Elaine cut in smoothly. "I'm sure Vivian doesn't want to take attention away from the bride," she said with practiced graciousness. "Actually," Sophia interjected, linking her arm through mine, "I specifically want Aunt Vivian's dress documented. It's a work of art, and it turns out I come from a family of artists." She gave me a warm smile. I just didn't know it until today. The simple statement, delivered with such genuine affection, washed away the last vestiges of hurt from her thoughtless text message. In its place bloomed something new and tender, a reconnection, a second chance, a bridge across the years of misunderstanding. As the evening progressed, I found myself thinking about identity, how we define ourselves, how others define us, how easily those definitions can calcify into limitations if we allow them to. For years, I had accepted my family's diminished view of me, had accommodated their expectations by making myself smaller, less remarkable, less myself in their presence. All it had taken to shatter that pattern was the courage to simply be fully, unapologetically who I was, not as a rebuke or challenge but as an offering, a reintroduction of the self they had never truly known. When the cake was cut and the formal dances complete, I found a quiet moment alone at the edge of the ballroom, watching the celebration continue with a sense of bemused contentment. This was not at all how I had expected the day to unfold when I first received that hurtful text message. "Aunt Vivian?" Sophia appeared beside me, her wedding gown rustling softly as she moved. "I've been thinking. A dangerous pastime on one's wedding day," I teased gently. She smiled. "Maybe, but I wanted to ask you something." She hesitated, then continued with newfound determination. "Would you consider designing my outfit for the big charity gala Bradley's firm hosts in December? Something like what you're wearing now. Something that tells a story." The request, so simple yet so profound in what it represented, touched me deeply. "I would be honored," I said sincerely. "Any particular constellation you'd like featured?" Sophia's face lit up with genuine excitement. "You'd do that? Actually create something specifically for me?" "Of course," I replied. "That's what I do. It's who I am." And in that moment, standing in the glow of reception lights with my niece looking at me with new eyes, I felt the full circle of the day's journey. From hurt to healing, from exclusion to belonging, from invisibility to recognition. All because I had refused to be less than who I truly was. 3 days after the wedding, I returned to my daily routine in Manhattan. The gown hung in my workroom, a shimmering reminder of a day that had unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. I was making notes for an upcoming production of The Importance of Being Earnest when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. "Vivian Crawford speaking," I answered, balancing the phone between ear and shoulder as I sketched a preliminary design for Lady Bracknell. "Ms. Crawford, this is Imani Washington from Style and Society magazine." The voice was brisk, professional. "I was hoping to speak with you about your work." I set my pencil down, puzzled. "My costume design work?" "Actually, I'm calling about a gown you wore to your niece's wedding this past weekend." "A midnight blue. Do peony silk with constellation beadwork?" I froze. "How do you know about that?" "The wedding photographer, Eliza Chen, is a friend of mine. She showed me some of the detail shots she took. It's extraordinary work. We're doing a feature on overlooked fashion artists, and I'd love to include you." My mind raced to catch up. With this unexpected development, "I'm not a fashion designer," I explained. "I'm a theatrical costume designer. The dress was a one-off, personal project." "That's exactly what makes it interesting," Imani countered. The line between costume and fashion has always been permeable, but few people move between those worlds with the level of craftsmanship you've demonstrated. Would you consider an interview and a photo shoot featuring the gown? Before I could formulate a response, my call waiting beeped. Could you hold for just a moment? I switched lines without waiting for an answer. Vivian Crawford. Aunt Vivian? It's Sophia. My niece sounded breathless with excitement. You won't believe what's happening. The wedding photos are causing a sensation. Eliza, our photographer, posted a few sneak peeks on her professional Instagram, including close-ups of your dress, and they've gone viral. She's had inquiries from 3 different magazines asking who designed it. I laughed, despite myself. I just got a call from one of them. Style and Society. That's amazing. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. I'm still on the other line with them. Say yes, Sophia insisted. This could be huge for you. Huge for what? Sophia, I'm 68 years old. I'm not looking to launch a fashion career. Maybe not, but don't you think your work deserves to be seen? To be recognized beyond theater circles? Her question gave me pause. Throughout my career, I had prioritized the stories my costumes served rather than my own recognition. I created for characters, for narratives, for the seamless immersion of audiences into different worlds and times. The idea of stepping into the spotlight myself was foreign, even uncomfortable. Let me call you back, I told Sophia, then returned to Imani. I'm sorry for the interruption. You were saying? I was proposing a feature article. 4 pages in our innovation issue, out next month. We'd photograph you with the gown, discuss your approach to design, your career trajectory. It would be a celebration of craftsmanship across disciplines. I'll need to think about it, I said honestly. This isn't something I ever anticipated. Of course. Take the weekend to consider. I'll email you the details. Her tone warmed slightly. For what it's worth, Miss Crawford, we rarely see this level of artistry in either fashion or costume design these days. Your work deserves a wider audience. After we disconnected, I sat in my studio, surrounded by the tools and materials of my life's work, considering what had just transpired. The gown that had begun as a response to dismissal, as a reclamation of my professional dignity in the face of family diminishment, was now potentially launching me into an entirely unexpected arena. Before I could fully process this, my phone chimed with a text from Charles. Is it true your dress is all over the internet? Elaine just showed me. Quite impressive, Viv. I had to smile at the understatement so characteristic of my brother. Apparently so, I replied. Strange world we live in. Listen, he texted back immediately. I owe you an apology. I've never properly acknowledged your accomplishments. I didn't understand what you did because I never really tried to. I'm sorry for that. The simple admission, arriving via text message just as Sophia's hurtful comment had weeks earlier, created a surprising emotional resonance. Thank you, Charles. That means more than you might think. Dinner next week when you're in town for the charity gala meeting with Sophia? Just us. I agreed, then set my phone down, marveling at how a single garment had already begun to alter relationships that had been set in their patterns for decades. A gown created in response to hurt was somehow generating healing instead. By Monday morning, I had 3 more interview requests, an invitation to give a guest lecture at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and a voicemail from Bradley's grandfather, connecting me with the drama department at Columbia University where he had formerly taught. The snowball effect was both bewildering and, I had to admit, somewhat gratifying. I called Imani at Style and Society and agreed to the interview and photo shoot, scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I had costumes to complete for Ernest, a meeting with the director of the Public Theater's upcoming season, and now a dinner to plan with my brother. The subsequent days passed in a blur of activity. I worked with my usual focus on the period costumes for Wilde's comedy, but found my thoughts repeatedly drifting to the magazine feature, wondering what it might mean for my career at this late stage. I had never sought the spotlight, Theatrical costume designers rarely received public recognition beyond the credits in a playbill. Our success was measured by how seamlessly our work served the production, by the extent to which audiences forgot they were looking at costumes at all. The day of the photo shoot arrived crisp and clear, a perfect October morning that matched the one when Sophia had been born, and I had gazed up at Cassiopeia's distinctive W shape among the stars. I took the gown from its protective garment bag, the beadwork catching the morning light exactly as I had envisioned when selecting those particular crystals and threads. The magazine had arranged to photograph me in my studio, wanting to capture the environment where the gown had been created. The photographer, a thoughtful woman in her 40s with an artist's eye for composition, arranged my workspace to highlight the creative process. Design sketches artfully displayed, fabric swatches draped over forms, spools of thread arranged by color. "We want to tell the story of creation," she explained, "not just show the finished product." I found myself unexpectedly moved by her respect for the process, for the countless hours of thought and labor that went into a single garment. So many of those hours had been invisible throughout my career, acknowledged only by fellow craftspeople who understood what it took to create something that seemed effortless in its final form. The interview with Imani followed the photo session. We sat in the small sitting area of my apartment, the gown now carefully positioned on a dress form between us, catching the afternoon light. "Tell me about your journey," she began. "How did you move from theatrical costumes to creating something so personal?" I considered the question, aware that the simple truth, that I'd made the gown in response to a hurtful text from my niece, wasn't the whole story. "I've spent decades creating garments that tell other people's stories," I said. Finally, this was the first time I created something to tell my own. "And what story were you telling?" she asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. That expertise doesn't always announce itself loudly. That craft refines itself in the shadows before it's ready for the light. That there's a difference between seeming and being. I smiled, touching one of the Austrian crystals that represented the brightest star in Cassiopeia. And perhaps, that we all have constellations within us that others can't see unless we choose to reveal them. Imani nodded thoughtfully, jotting notes. "You mentioned the gown was for your niece's wedding. Was there special significance to that occasion?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty without unnecessary detail. Family gatherings have a way of reminding us who we've been to certain people, regardless of who we've become in the wider world. I wanted to bring my whole self to this particular gathering, not just the Aunt Vivian they were familiar with, but the professional I've spent a lifetime becoming. And how was it received? I smiled at the memory of Sophia's face when she first saw the gown, the moment of recognition that had sparked our reconciliation. Better than I could have hoped, it created an opening for genuine connection. The interview continued, touching on my career highlights, my approach to design, my thoughts on the relationship between costume and identity. Throughout, I found myself articulating perspectives I'd developed over decades but rarely had occasion to express. It was, in its way, as creatively satisfying as designing a particularly challenging costume. This crafting of words to convey the philosophy that had guided my hands all these years. When Imani finally turned off her recorder, she sat back with a satisfied smile. "This is going to be a wonderful feature, Ms. Crawford. Thank you for your candor." "Thank you for your interest," I replied sincerely. It's not often that costume designers step into the spotlight. "Perhaps they should," she said, gathering her materials. "The stories behind the scenes are often as compelling as those on stage." After she left, I stood in my studio, looking at the gown that had set all of this in motion. In 3 weeks, it had transformed from a personal statement into a potential career pivot. The irony wasn't lost on me, that after decades of dressing others, it had taken dressing myself to attract this level of attention. My phone rang, disrupting my reflections. It was Charles, confirming our dinner plans for the following evening. "I've made reservations at Margot," he said, naming an upscale bistro near my apartment. My treat. That sounds lovely, I agreed, wondering what version of my brother I would encounter. The dismissive one I'd grown accustomed to over the years, or this newer, more thoughtful Charles who had emerged in the wake of the wedding. Vivian, he added, his voice taking on an unfamiliar hesitancy. I want you to know I'm proud of you. I always have been, in my way, even if I didn't show it properly. What you've accomplished, it's remarkable. The simple acknowledgement, so long in coming, caught me off guard. Thank you, Charles. That means a great deal. After we hung up, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. For so long, I had told myself that external validation didn't matter, that the satisfaction of doing work I loved was enough. And it had been, mostly. But there was something powerfully affirming about being seen, truly seen, by those whose opinions had shaped my sense of self long before I'd developed the strength to define myself on my own terms. The dinner with Charles the next evening was unlike any interaction we'd had in years. He arrived at the restaurant early, waiting for me at a corner table with a bottle of wine already breathing. As I approached, he stood, embracing me with an enthusiasm that would have been unthinkable a month ago. You look wonderful, he said, stepping back to admire my outfit, a simple but elegantly cut pantsuit in deep aubergine that I'd made years ago for an opening night celebration. Did you make that as well? I did, I confirmed, pleased that he'd thought to ask. Most of my clothes are my own work. It's more practical than you might think when you have the skills. We settled at the table and Charles poured the wine. A rich burgundy he remembered was my favorite. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the wedding, he began without preamble. About how little I've understood your life, your work. I looked you up, online. Found interviews with directors you've worked with, reviews that specifically mentioned your costume designs. I raised an eyebrow. Research on your own sister? How very thorough of you. He laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him in too long. I deserved that. But seriously, Vivian, I had no idea of the scope of your career. The Tony nominations, the Drama Desk Award, that feature in American Theater magazine 5 years ago. Why didn't you ever tell me about these achievements? I considered my wine before answering. Would you have been interested? Our conversations over the years have centered on your work, your family, your community. When I did mention theatrical projects, you tended to change the subject. Charles looked genuinely chagrined. Was I really so self-absorbed? We all have our blind spots, I said gently. And to be fair, I stopped trying after a while. It was easier to exist in separate spheres. Well, I'm paying attention now, he said firmly. Tell me about this magazine interview. Sophia says it could lead to new opportunities for you. As we shared our meal, I found myself opening up to my brother in ways I hadn't in decades, describing the creative challenges of specific productions, the satisfaction of solving design problems, the collaborative joy of theater at its best. Charles listened with unprecedented interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his genuine desire to understand this aspect of my life he'd overlooked for so long. He said as we finished dessert, Elaine has been surprisingly impressed by all this. She's telling everyone that her niece-in-law's dress was designed by the celebrated Broadway costume designer Vivian Crawford. I nearly choked on my coffee. Is she really? Charles nodded, smiling wryly. Status matters enormously to Elaine, as you know. The fact that you're now being featured in magazines and sought after for interviews has completely reframed how she sees you. Suddenly, you're not the eccentric artist sister. You're the successful design professional with connections in New York's theatrical elite. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. And all it took was one dress. No, Charles corrected me, his expression growing serious. All it took was you finally refusing to be less than who you are when you're with us. That's on me, Viv. I should have championed you all along, the way you always championed me when we were young. The reference to our childhood? when I had indeed been his fiercest defender against schoolyard bullies and our father's sometimes harsh criticism, caught me by surprise. You remember that? Of course I do. You were always the brave one. Somehow, I forgot that along the way. He reached across the table to take my hand. I'm sorry it took so long for me to see you clearly again. As we walked back to my apartment after dinner, the October night crisp around us, Charles asked the question I'd been considering myself over recent days. So what happens next? With this sudden interest in your work, I mean. Are you considering designing for a wider audience? I looked up at the night sky, barely visible through Manhattan's ambient light, thinking of constellations and patterns and the stories we choose to see in them. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. For now, I'm focused on the production of Ernest that opens next month. But after that, I'm finding myself unexpectedly open to possibilities. Whatever you decide, Charles said as we reached my building. I'd like to be part of it this time. A better brother. A more attentive one. I'd like that, I said sincerely. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, I reflected on the strange journey of recent weeks, from the sting of Sophia's casual dismissal to this moment of reconnection and possibility. The midnight blue gown hanging in my workroom had begun as a response to hurt, but had transformed into something far more significant. A bridge between worlds I had kept separate for too long, and a doorway to a future I hadn't imagined for myself. What lay beyond that doorway remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I found myself eager to step through and discover what awaited on the other side. If you're still with us on this journey, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who need to hear them. November brought the first real chill of winter to New York City, along with the publication of Style and Society's innovation issue. The day it hit newsstands, Sophia sent me a photograph of herself holding the magazine open to my feature, her expression one of unabashed pride. The 4-page spread included studio portraits of me with the midnight blue gown, detail shots of the constellation beadwork, and candid images of my workspace. The headline read, "Behind the Seams, Broadway's hidden design genius steps into the spotlight." Imani's article was thoughtful and nuanced, positioning my work within the broader context of theatrical design, while highlighting the artistry that transcended the boundaries between costume and couture. She had captured the philosophy that guided my hands, the reverence for craft that had defined my career. But most surprisingly, she had woven my personal story, or at least the parts I had chosen to share, throughout the piece, creating a narrative about identity, recognition, and claiming one's rightful place in both professional spheres and family circles. The magazine had barely been on stands for 24 hours when my phone began ringing with opportunities I had never anticipated. A luxury department store wanted to discuss a limited capsule collection of evening wear. The Metropolitan Museum's Costume Institute curator called about featuring some of my theatrical work in an upcoming exhibition on the intersection of stage and street fashion. Most unexpectedly, 3 prominent actresses, 2 I had dressed for productions and 1 I had never worked with, reached out about designing custom gowns for the upcoming award season. I sat at my work table, surrounded by sketches for Ernest, which would open in just 2 weeks, trying to make sense of this sudden pivot in my professional trajectory. At 68, I had assumed my career path was set, continuing to design for theatrical productions, perhaps gradually reducing my workload as I approached my 70s, eventually focusing on consulting and teaching the next generation of costume designers. Now, entirely new possibilities were unfolding before me, challenging my assumptions about how the final act of my career might play out. A knock at my apartment door interrupted these reflections. When I answered, I found a delivery person holding an enormous arrangement of white orchids. Vivian Crawford? He confirmed, consulting his clipboard. Yes, that's me. Special delivery. Sign here, please. The card nestled among the blooms read, To the constellation that has always shone brightly, even when we failed to look up at the sky. With love and long overdue admiration, Charles, Elaine, and Sophia. I placed the orchids on my coffee table, touching the delicate flowers with gentle fingers. The gesture was so unlike my practical brother and status-conscious sister-in-law that it could only have been Sophia's idea. Yet they had all signed the card, suggesting a shift in the family dynamic that extended beyond just my niece's newfound appreciation. My intercom buzzed, the doorman announcing another visitor. Moments later, I opened my door to find Marcus Reynolds, the artistic director of the Public Theater and a longtime collaborator, holding a copy of Style and Society. You've been holding out on me, Vivian, he said by way of greeting, stepping into my apartment with the familiar ease of a decades-long friendship. All these years, I thought I was working with a mere costume designer, when apparently I've been collaborating with a visionary craftsman who transcends the boundaries between theatrical illusion and wearable art. He quoted the magazine with mock solemnity, eyes twinkling. Don't you start, I warned, taking the magazine from him and setting it aside. I've had quite enough of that kind of talk this week. Marcus made himself comfortable in my living room, admiring the orchids with a raised eyebrow. Family? He guessed. Surprisingly, yes. The same family that inspired your act of sartorial rebellion in the first place. He had been one of the few people I'd told about Sophia's text and my response to it. The very same. Turns out sometimes you have to break a pattern to create a new one. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of new patterns, that's actually why I'm here. I've been approached by Jennifer Howard about the new multimedia presentation she's developing for next fall. My interest immediately piqued. Jennifer Howard was one of the most innovative directors working in contemporary theater, known for productions that blurred the lines between traditional drama, performance art, and technology. She's developing a piece about women's hidden contributions to various fields throughout history, Marcus continued. Scientists whose discoveries were attributed to male colleagues, artists whose work was signed by husbands or brothers, architects whose buildings bear other names. But with a twist, the production will include real-time creation of the work being discussed, actual scientific experiments performed on stage, paintings created during the performance, and so on. Fascinating concept, I said, already intrigued. But what does this have to do with me? Jennifer wants to include a segment on textile arts and costume. She saw your magazine feature and immediately called me. She's proposing a segment where you would actually create a garment on stage during the performance, demonstrating the art form while the narrative explores how women's textile work has been historically dismissed as craft rather than art. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. You want me to sew on stage, in front of an audience? Marcus, I'm a behind-the-scenes person. That's the whole point of being a costume designer. I know it's outside your comfort zone, he acknowledged. But that's precisely why Jennifer wants you. Your story, going from being told to dress less poorly to creating something so extraordinary it launched you into a whole new phase of recognition, it perfectly encapsulates the theme of the piece. I shook my head, unsure whether to be flattered or alarmed. I design costumes for performers, Marcus. I'm not a performer myself. Aren't you, though? He challenged gently. What was that gown, if not a performance of your own expertise? A declaration of identity through your craft? His words gave me pause. He wasn't entirely wrong. The midnight blue gown had indeed been a kind of performance, a demonstration of skill, a statement of professional identity, a reclamation of personal dignity. Just meet with Jennifer, Marcus urged. Hear her vision directly. If it's not a fit, no hard feelings. But I think you might find the project speaks to something you've been moving toward, whether you've realized it or not, stepping from behind the curtain to claim your place in the spotlight. I promised to consider it, and after Marcus left, I found myself returning to my workroom, drawn to the midnight blue gown still displayed on its form. What he had said resonated more deeply than I wanted to admit. Throughout my career, I had channeled my creativity into serving others' visions, directors, playwrights, actors, finding fulfillment in contribution rather than recognition. But the gown had awakened something different in me, a desire to create on my own terms, to express my own vision directly rather than through the medium of a production. My phone chimed with a text from Sophia. "Don't forget, charity gala planning. Lunch tomorrow at 1. Can't wait to discuss design ideas for my outfit." The reminder brought me back to the immediate present and the commitment I'd made to design a special piece for my niece. Unlike the impersonal text exchange that had sparked this entire journey, this message carried the warmth of genuine connection, of shared excitement about a creative collaboration. The following day, I met Sophia at an elegant cafe near her office. She arrived with a portfolio tucked under her arm, eyes bright with anticipation. "I've been researching your work," she announced as soon as we were seated. "I found photos of costumes you designed for that Shakespeare festival in London, and the Opera House production in Sydney. Aunt Vivian, why didn't I know about any of this growing up? You've designed for some of the most prestigious productions in the world. I tried to share my work with the family for many years," I said gently without accusation. But after a while, it seemed easier not to mention it. Sophia looked genuinely distressed. "That's horrible. I'm so sorry we made you feel that way." "Water. Under the bridge," I assured her, touched by her sincerity. "What matters is where we go from here." She opened her portfolio, revealing printouts of various evening gowns, fashion sketches, and color swatches. "I've been thinking about the charity gala. It's a major event for Bradley's firm. International clients, potential investors, press coverage. I want to wear something that honors your expertise but is still appropriate for a corporate environment." She pushed the portfolio toward me. "These are just ideas to start the conversation. I know you're the expert." I glanced through her research, noting the careful thought she'd put into the selection. Gone was the dismissive niece who had instructed me to dress less poorly. In her place sat a young woman genuinely interested in my professional perspective, eager to learn from my experience. "Tell me about the gala itself," I said, pulling out my sketchbook. "The venue, the atmosphere, what you want to convey with your presence there." As Sophia described the event, a fundraiser for international education initiatives hosted at the city's Modern Art Museum, I began to sketch, asking occasional questions about her preferences while guiding her toward options. That would flatter her figure and suit the occasion. Unlike our previous interactions, where she had issued directives from a position of assumed superiority, this was a true collaboration, a mutual exchange of ideas and expertise. By the time our entrees arrived, we had settled on a concept, a sophisticated sheath in deep green with architectural elements that nodded to both the modern art surroundings and Bradley's profession, while incorporating subtle details that would make the piece uniquely special. "It's perfect," Sophia said, studying the sketch with obvious admiration. "Exactly what I was hoping for but couldn't articulate. This is why you're the professional." "We'll need to schedule fittings," I said, already mentally cataloging the materials I would need. "And I'll want to see the shoes and jewelry you plan to wear so we can ensure everything harmonizes." "Whatever you need," she agreed eagerly. "I'm completely in your hands." As we finished our lunch, Sophia hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Everyone's talking about the magazine feature and all these new opportunities you're being offered. What are you going to do? Will you branch out from theater into fashion design?" It was the same question I'd been asking myself since the offers began pouring in. "I'm still deciding," I admitted. "There's a part of me that's excited by these new possibilities, but another part that worries about overextending myself or diluting the theatrical work that's been my passion for decades." Sophia considered this thoughtfully. You know, when I was little, I used to tell everyone my aunt designed costumes for Broadway shows. It was my way of bragging about you. Somewhere along the way, probably when Mom started emphasizing connections and status, I lost sight of how genuinely impressive your career has always been. Her candor touched me. Thank you for saying that, Sophia. I just want you to know that whatever you decide to do next, I'm your biggest fan now. And not because you're suddenly getting magazine features or because other people are impressed by your work, but because I finally see for myself how extraordinary you are. As we parted ways after lunch, Sophia embraced me with genuine warmth. I can't wait to watch what you do next, Aunt Vivian, and I'm so grateful I get to be part of it. Walking back to my apartment through the crisp November afternoon, I found myself reflecting on transformation. Not just the obvious changes in how my family now perceived me, but the more subtle shift in how I was beginning to see myself. For decades, I had defined my success by my invisibility, by how seamlessly my work served the productions it was created for, by how completely I subjugated my own creative identity to the vision of directors and playwrights. The midnight blue gown had disrupted that pattern, forcing me to consider what it might mean to create as myself. For myself, with my own name attached, the magazine feature had amplified that disruption, creating a public narrative about my work that existed independently from the productions it had served. And now Jennifer Howard's proposal suggested yet another evolution, not just stepping into the spotlight, but making the very process of creation visible, performative, part of the story, rather than hidden behind it. By the time I reached my building, I had made a decision. I would meet with Jennifer Howard. I would at least hear her vision for the multimedia piece and consider how my story, my craft, might contribute to this larger narrative about women's hidden contributions. And I would accept the Metropolitan Museum's invitation to feature my theatrical designs in their exhibition, allowing my work to be seen in a new context, appreciated for its artistry rather than its utility. But I would not abandon the theatrical work that had been my passion for 4 decades. Instead, I would seek balance, continuing to design for select productions while exploring these new opportunities that allowed different aspects of my creativity to flourish. As I entered my apartment, my phone chimed with another text from Charles. Elaine and I just got tickets to opening night of Ernest. Looking forward to finally seeing your work in its proper context. Such a simple message, and yet it represented a seismic shift in our relationship. After decades of disinterest, my brother was making a genuine effort to understand and appreciate my professional world. Not because external validation had suddenly made my work worthy of attention, but because he had finally recognized the value it had held all along. I sat at my desk and began sketching initial designs for Sophia's gala dress, feeling a sense of creative energy I hadn't experienced in years. The midnight blue gown had begun as a response to dismissal, as a reclamation of professional dignity in the face of familial diminishment. But it had evolved into something far more significant, a catalyst for transformation, an opening to new possibilities, a bridge between worlds I had kept separate for far too long. As twilight fell outside my windows, I found myself thinking about constellations, how ancient cultures had looked up at random points of light in the darkness and drawn connections between them, creating stories, finding meaning in patterns. My own constellation, the one I had beaded into midnight blue silk, was beginning to take on new dimensions, connecting points in my life I had never expected to align. My theatrical expertise, my family relationships, my sense of personal identity, and now, these unexpected new creative pathways. The story wasn't ending, it was expanding, and I was eager to see what pattern would emerge next. December arrived with swirling snow and the frantic energy that always engulfs New York during the holiday season. My meeting with Jennifer Howard had gone surprisingly well. Her vision for the multimedia piece was thoughtful and provocative, and after some negotiation about the parameters of my participation, I had agreed to be part of the project. Ernest had opened to excellent reviews, with several critics specifically praising the costume design for its subtle subversion of Victorian silhouettes, but it was Sophia's charity gala that occupied most of my creative thoughts. The deep green dress was taking shape on a form in my workroom, a sophisticated piece with clean architectural lines and unexpected details, hand-embroidered vines that spiraled subtly around the bodice, representing growth and renewal. Unlike the midnight blue gown with its bold statement of constellations, this piece whispered rather than declared, its artistry revealing itself gradually to those who took the time to look closely. 3 days before the gala, Sophia arrived for her final fitting. As she slipped into the dress, I watched her expression in the mirror, the wonder and delight as she saw herself transformed. "It's beyond anything I imagined," she breathed, turning to examine the way the fabric moved with her. "How did you know this was exactly right?" I adjusted the hem, checking that it fell perfectly. That's the art of costume design, understanding how a garment can express something essential about the wearer. In theater, we use clothing to reveal character. This dress shows who you are becoming, not just who you've been. Sophia's eyes met mine in the mirror. "I wish I'd understood your gift sooner. All those years wasted." "Not wasted," I corrected gently. "Just part of a longer journey." As I made the final adjustments, Sophia told me about an unexpected development. Bradley's firm is establishing a scholarship for design students focusing on sustainable fashion. They've asked if you would be willing to serve on the selection committee. I paused, pen in hand. "That's a significant commitment." "It would only be twice a year," she explained. "And they specifically want someone with your background, understanding both theatrical design and wearable art." They were quite insistent, after seeing the magazine feature. The request represented yet another expansion of my professional sphere, another way in which the midnight blue gown continued to open doors I'd never even approached. "Tell them I'm interested," I said. "We can discuss details after the holidays." The night of the gala arrived with a fresh dusting of snow that transformed the city into a glittering wonderland. I'd been invited to attend as Sophia and Bradley's guest, another small but significant marker of how thoroughly our relationship had evolved over recent months. I chose to wear one of my earlier creations, a silver gray ensemble with subtle iridescent beading that caught the light as I moved. When I arrived at the museum, the modern glass entrance hall had been transformed into a winter garden, with white lights twinkling among artfully arranged evergreens. I spotted Charles and Elaine near a monumental sculpture, deep in conversation with an elegant older couple. To my surprise, Charles immediately waved me over. "Vivian, there you are. I'd like you to meet Justice and Mrs. Reynolds. Alan, Christine, this is my sister, Vivian Crawford, the costume designer I was telling you about." Justice Reynolds, a figure of considerable legal prominence, reached for my hand with genuine interest. "Charles has been singing your praises. Apparently, we've been attending your costumed productions for years without realizing the family connection. The Public Theater's 12th night 2 summers ago was extraordinary," his wife added. "Those modernist interpretations of Elizabethan silhouettes were brilliant." I glanced at Charles, who looked both proud and slightly abashed. "I may have been doing some research on your career," he admitted, "making up for lost time." Before I could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd near the entrance. Sophia had arrived, the deep green dress making her appear simultaneously sophisticated and vibrant as she moved through the space with Bradley. People turned to watch her pass, not with the calculated assessment common at such events, but with genuine appreciation for the unusual elegance of her appearance. She spotted me and made her way over, embracing me warmly. "Everyone is asking about the dress," she whispered. "I've given out at least a dozen of your cards already. I had printed new business cards the previous week, elegant cream stock with my name and theatrical and bespoke design in simple typography. A small but concrete acknowledgement that my professional identity was expanding beyond its previous boundaries. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into conversations with an increasingly diverse circle: artistic directors of cultural institutions, fashion editors, corporate leaders with arts initiatives. My decades of theatrical design experience gave me a unique perspective on their questions about creativity, craft, and cultural expression. I wasn't just Sophia's aunt or Charles's sister. I was Vivian Crawford, a creative professional with distinct expertise and insight. During dinner, I was seated beside the museum's chief curator, a formidable woman in her 70s named Eleanor Reed. "I saw your piece in Style and Society," she said as we were served the first course. "Quite refreshing to see someone our age being celebrated for ongoing creativity, rather than just past accomplishments." "Our age?" I echoed with a smile. "Is that a diplomatic way of acknowledging we're both well past the ingenue stage?" She laughed. "Precisely. The art world has the same issue as fashion and theater, an obsession with youth and novelty at the expense of mastery and depth. Which is why I found your story so compelling. You've chosen to step forward with your own creative voice precisely at the age when many are stepping back. It wasn't entirely by choice," I admitted. "Sometimes life gives you an unexpected push." "The best journeys often begin that way," Eleanor observed. "Tell me, have you considered how you might shape this next phase? You have a rare opportunity to define a new model for creative longevity." Her question stayed with me throughout the evening, through the speeches and presentations, through Bradley's surprisingly heartfelt acknowledgement of Sophia's contributions to making the event a success, through the admiring comments about the green dress that continued to follow my niece like a subtle melody underneath the gala's broader orchestration. How might I shape this next phase? Not just accepting opportunities as they arrived, but deliberately crafting a new model for my creative practice, one that honored my theatrical roots while embracing these unexpected new branches. Near the end of the evening, I found myself standing beside Sophia at the edge of the dance floor, watching Charles and Elaine waltz with surprising grace. "I never knew they could dance like that," I remarked. "Neither did I," Sophia admitted. "There's a lot we're all discovering about each other lately." She turned to me, her expression suddenly serious. "I've been thinking about that text I sent you, the one about dressing less poorly. It keeps haunting me how cruel it was." "We've moved well beyond that," I assured her. "Yes, but I need you to know where it came from." She took a deep breath. "It wasn't really about your clothes at all. It was about my own insecurity. For years, Dad and Mom emphasized fitting in, meeting expectations, never drawing the wrong kind of attention. I was so afraid of anything that might disrupt the image we were supposed to project, and I represented disruption," I said, understanding finally clicking into place. "You represented authenticity," she corrected, which terrified me because I wasn't sure who I actually was beneath all the expectations. "When you showed up in that midnight blue gown, owning your expertise and your identity so completely, it was like looking at a version of freedom I didn't know was possible." Her insight caught me by surprise, not just the depth of her self-awareness, but the revelation that my act of self-reclamation had rippled outward, creating space for others to reconsider their own constraints. "The irony," I said softly, "is that I created that gown because of your text. Without that moment of hurt, I might never have taken that particular creative leap." Sophia's eyes widened. "So my worst moment led to your breakthrough?" "And then yours," I added. "Life has a strange circularity sometimes." As the gala drew to a close, guests departing into the snowy December night, I found myself lingering in the museum's entrance hall. The modern glass walls reflected the twinkling lights, creating a galaxy of stars around the Winter Garden installation. Constellations again, I thought. Points of light connected by imagination and intention to create meaning. My midnight blue gown with its beaded star patterns had indeed been a catalyst, but the true constellation was the one forming in my life now, connecting my theatrical expertise to new creative expressions, my professional identity to personal reclamation, my past to a future I was actively shaping rather than passively accepting. Eleanor's question echoed in my mind. How might I shape this next phase? As I stepped out into the gentle snowfall, I realized I finally had my answer. Not with grand declarations or dramatic pivots, but with the same careful stitches that had created the midnight blue gown. One deliberate choice after another, binding authenticity to expertise, connecting personal truth to professional expression, creating something both deeply personal and universally resonant. The journey that had begun with a hurtful text message wasn't ending. It was evolving, expanding, becoming a legacy of creativity that might inspire others to recognize the constellations within themselves, the patterns of talent, experience, and wisdom that are too often dimmed by others' expectations, waiting only for the courage to shine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.